The Destruction of the Algerine Navy by Alfred H. On the conclusion of the Dutch War, it became necessary to restore order on the high seas by destroying the pirates who had taken advantage of the disturbed condition of things to prey upon English and Dutch commerce. And with this view Charles II sent Sir Thomas Allen with a stout squadron into the Mediterranean to repress the Algerines, and the Dutch sent Admiral Van Ghent with a squadron to secure their trade. Van Ghent, having engaged 6 corsairs, forced them to fly to their own coasts, where probably they would have escaped if Commodore Beach with 4 English frigates had not fallen upon them, and after a close chase, obliged them to run aground. In this situation they were attacked by the English and Dutch in their boats, and being abandoned by their respective crews, were all taken, and a great number of Christian slaves of different nations released. The English Commodore presented 16 Dutch slaves to Admiral Van Ghent, and received from him 20 English by way of exchange, but the Algerine ships being leaky, they were burnt. The same year some of our frigates attacked 7 of the enemy's best ships near Cape Geta. The Admiral and Vice-Admiral of the Algerines carried 56 guns each. Their Rear Admiral, the biggest ship in the squadron, carried 60 and the least 40. Yet after a sharp engagement the Vice-Admiral sank, and the rest were forced to retire, most of them miserably disabled. At the close of the year 1669 Captain Kempthorne, afterwards Sir John, in the Mary Rose, a small frigate, engaged 7 Algerine men of war, and after a very warm action, forced them to sheer off, being in no condition to continue the fight any longer. It is somewhat extraordinary that, considering the Dutch as well as the English were concerned in attacking these pirates, we have no better account of the war that was carried on against them, or of the force they employed, than we are left to collect as we can, from scattered accounts of particular engagements. In 1668 their navy only consisted of 24 ships, great and small, that is, from about 50 to 20 guns, and they had likewise 6 new ships of force upon the stocks. Yet this pitiful enemy continued to disturb, and even to distress the commerce of both the maritime powers for several years. At last Sir Edward Spragge was sent with a strong squadron of men of war and frigates to put an end to the war. Spragge sailed from England, on this expedition, in the spring of the year 1671, with 5 frigates and 3 fireships, uniting his fleet with a squadron of as many more ships already at sea, so that in all his fleet consisted of about 12 sail. In the latter end of the month of April, he had intelligence that there were several Algerine men of war in Buje Bay, on which he called a council of war, when it was resolved that he ought immediately to attack them. In pursuance of this resolution he sailed thither, but in his passage had the misfortune to have the Eagle fireship disabled by a storm, and soon after, one of his ships springing her main mast, was obliged to bear away for the Spanish shore. Sir Edward, however, persisted in his design, refitted the Eagle, and bore into the Bay of Buje with a brisk gale, not doubting that he should be able to fire the ships. But by the time they got within half-shot of the castle and forts it fell a dead calm, and when the wind rose again, it proved contrary. On May 2nd they were able to do nothing for the same reason, the wind changing every half hour. Upon which, Sir Edward resolved to make an attempt upon them in the night with his boats and the smallest of his fireships, which rowed as well as a longboat. About 12 o'clock that night he executed his project, sending in all his boats, and the Eagle fireship, under the command of his eldest lieutenant, Mr. Nugent, but the night proving very dark, and the high land obscuring the ships as they drew near them, they passed by, and Lieutenant Nugent, leaving one of the boats with the fireships, besides her own, rowed in to discover the enemy, leaving orders with the captain of the fireship to come to an anchor in case he found shoal water. The lieutenant had not left them a minute before he perceived himself within pistol-shot of the ships, and, concluding the business now as good as done, steered off again to find the fireship, and, to his amazement, saw her in flames. The enemy taking the alarm at this, the lieutenant was forced to retire with his boats, and so this promising enterprise, which had given hopes of burning the Algerine men of war without the loss of a man, miscarried. The next day the enemy unrigged all their ships and made a strong boom with their yards, topmasts and cables, buoyed up with casks, for which they had all the leisure and convenience they could wish, the wind hindering the English from doing anything, and to try the admiral's patience to the very utmost. It so fell out that a drunken gunner firing a pistol, his other small fireship was destroyed, so that he had now none left but the little Victory, which drew too much water to enter that part of the bay where the Algerines lay. On Monday, May 8, 1671, there appeared a considerable body of horse and foot in the neighborhood of the bay, and this was soon after discovered to be an escort to a very large convoy of ammunition sent from Algiers to the ships, on the safe arrival of which they fired all their cannon, to testify their joy. Sir Edward Spragg, considering this, and not knowing what future reinforcements they might receive, resolved to take the earliest opportunity of making his last and utmost effort, and in order thereto, directed the Victory to be lightened, so that she might not draw above 8 feet. About noon there sprang up a fine breeze to the east, upon which the admiral gave the signal for the men-of-war to draw into a line and bear up into the bay, but immediately after the wind sank again, and they began to despair of doing anything. About 2 the gale sprang up again, and the ships bore in as they were directed. The admiral came to an anchor in 4 fathom of water, close under the walls of their castle, which fired upon him continually for 2 hours. In this interim he sent in his own pinnace and those of the Mary and the Dragon. These cut the boom, though not without considerable loss. The lieutenant who commanded the Mary's boat's crew had 8 wounded with himself. Lieutenant Pierce of the Dragon was also wounded, with 10 of his men and 1 killed. In the admiral's own pinnace there were 7 killed, and all the rest wounded, except Mr. Harmon, who commanded it. The boom being cut, the fireship went in, and getting up athwart their bowsprits, their ships being aground and fast to the castles, she burnt very well and destroyed them all. Captain Harris, who commanded her, his master's mate, gunner, and 1 of his seamen were desperately wounded with small shot, and this at their entrance, so that probably the whole design would have proved abortive if the admiral had not with great prudence commissioned Henry Williams, then 1 of his master's mates, but who had formerly commanded the Rose fireship, to take the charge of the vessel in case the captain was disabled, which he did accordingly, and performed all that could be expected from him. This loss was irreparable to the Algerines, who had picked out the 7 men-of-war that were here burnt, on purpose to fight Sir Edward Spragg, and furnished them with their best brass ordnance from on board all the rest of their vessels, and between 18 and 1900 chosen men double-officered, under the command of Old Turkey, their admiral. Of this force between 300 and 400 men were killed, the castle and town were miserably shattered, and a vast number of people slain and wounded, and, what much increased the misfortune, all their surgeons' chests were burnt on board their ships, so that numbers died for want of having their wounds dressed. Besides the men-of-war there were burnt a Genoese ship, a small English prize, and a settee. In this engagement, Sir Edward Spragg had only 17 men killed and 41 wounded. This and other misfortunes caused such a tumult among the Algerines that they murdered their day and chose another, by whom peace was concluded to the satisfaction of the English on December 9, 1671.